Hi everyone, today we're going to do a video on how to create a character for Pathfinder 2. I previously created a video showing how to create a character for D&D 5e, and at that point in time I pretty much knew the D&D 5e system quite well, and that was more just a tutorial to help newer players understand how to go about creating characters and how D&D works, etc. However, this time around I just started my first Pathfinder 2 campaign, and it took me a while to get down all the basics, and so I thought I'd make a couple of videos to explain the concepts in Pathfinder 2, but it's not just for viewers, it's also for myself. So maybe sometimes I might make mistakes in how certain rules work or something like that. I apologize up front, but this is a learning experience not only for you, but also for myself. And so before we start, I would just like to say a bit about D&D 5e and Pathfinder 2. So if you're a completely new player to role-playing games, then Pathfinder 2 could be quite daunting. There's a lot of rules, there's a lot of things to keep in mind, and I really advise that you take the time to read through the whole player's guide before you actually start playing the game, so that you can familiarize yourself with all the basic concepts, all the phrases, all the actions, everything really that you can do. I found the player manual to explain things quite well. There are certain areas that can be ambiguous, and you will probably find that you'd have to go through the manual at least 2, maybe 3 times, depending on how attentive you are. For players that are experienced in other role-playing systems but moving to Pathfinder 2, I need to say here, not people moving from Pathfinder to Pathfinder 2, but players that move from D&D 5e, for example. Pathfinder 2 is a lot more complicated, in my opinion, than D&D 5e. However, they share a lot of similarities, and I think if you are somewhat familiar with the 5e system, then a lot of the concepts won't be new to you, but there is definitely a big difference. So why Pathfinder 2 instead of a mechanic like D&D 5e? I would say the biggest difference, and what's positive about Pathfinder 2 is its versatility. You will find that if you've played 5e before, for example, as you level up, you gain very minimal extra skills. For example, you will be able to choose feats every 4 levels, and if you choose a feat you have to sacrifice stat bonuses, for example. Whereas in Pathfinder you get to choose between feats every 2nd level almost. You don't have to sacrifice stat bonuses for feats, and because of that your character becomes a lot more malleable in your hands. And I guess that's one of the big differences between the two systems, other than all the extra rules and actions and spells, etc. I'm going to start this video showing how to create a character in Pathfinder 2. Now, I want to add a disclaimer beforehand that while I might make references comparing the D&D 5e system to Pathfinder 2 to explain concepts, the video isn't meant to be a comparison between the two systems. I only use it as a mechanic to show differences and similarities purely to explain concepts. So with that out of the way, I think let's start at the beginning of every RPG game, and that is, what character are you going to play? Obviously, this is not referring to the background of the character or the personality of the character, but the actual mechanics of your character. So, which class is your character going to be? What race is it going to be? And we're going to start there. Obviously, so I will use the compendium here. So I have bought most of the Pathfinder 2 books on Roll20, so I have access to a lot of stuff in the compendiums. But the compendium is just a reflection of the Pathfinder 2 manual, and a lot of the stuff you will also be able to find online with references to where you can find things in the core rulebook and things like that. So I figured let's start by creating a rogue. So here I have a rogue. I would suggest that you always first have a look at the class you would want to create. You don't necessarily start there, but there are some important things you need to pick up before you start building your character. So as I said, for me, let's start with a rogue. The main thing you need to focus on at the beginning is this phrase here, key ability, dexterity or other. So at first level, your class gives you an ability boost to dexterity or an option from Rogue's Racket. So Rogue's Racket is a part later on when you create your character. But the reason why I would start here is because a lot of classes have specific key abilities. So for example, a fighter will either have a key ability of strength or dexterity. A sorcerer will have a key ability of charisma, and that is simply to guide you into how you will shape the rest of the decisions you want to make regarding your character. Because there are pretty much 4 steps to creating your character, mostly around the stats, and we'll get to how the stats work in a moment. But you always need to select an ancestry. So in Pathfinder 2 it's called ancestries. In in D&D 5e this would be your race. Secondly, you will also choose a background. Now backgrounds are very similar obviously to D&D backgrounds, so this would be whether or not your character is an acrobat, or whether or not your character comes through from a history of thieves. And each of those backgrounds will provide you with certain skills and certain stats. And then finally you will obviously choose your class. So we chose the rogue class. We know that one of its focuses is dexterity. And so when we start looking at our ancestries, we are looking for ancestries that at least boost your dexterity, because dexterity is your main stat for the rogue. So let's look at elf, for example. Now in the player's guide and on the compendium, you will find all this text explaining elves, their history, their behaviors, and how others may perceive you. And this is just mostly role-playing guides. So if you role-play an elf, then people might see you as always focusing on your appearance. So that may be something you want to act out. Obviously these are guidelines, you don't have to do them. It's more just giving you an idea of how elves are perceived in this world. Some more physical descriptions so that you can know what your elf would generally look like. And then we get to the actual stats. So here you can see elves. You can see all the information you need about an elf. For example, playing an elf gives you an initial bonus of 6 HP. The size is medium. This is pretty basic across most systems, where medium just indicates normal creatures. Most player characters, for example, will always be medium. Except for gnomes, goblins, halflings, they are qualified as small, and then you get a tiny below that, and you obviously get sizes above medium. But that's just how much space they take up on the map. Here it indicates your speed, traveling speed, so you can move 30 feet as an action during combat. Here you'll see ability boosts. So this is where we start with our character. So if we create a character here, if you look at the Pathfinder character sheet, these are your ability scores. And let's talk quickly about how ability scores work in Pathfinder and how you assign stats to it. It is very similar to D&D. It's the same kind of abilities. They mean the same kind of things. So strength represents your physical prowess in strength-like checks. Your dexterity refers to how mobile you are, constitutions, how hardy you are, intelligence, wisdom, charisma. They're fairly self-explanatory. But now, when it comes to initially allocating your ability scores when creating a character, The system works very similarly to a point buy system that you would find in D&D, whereby each element of your character will provide you with certain stats. For example, your ancestry. Here you can see your ancestry gives you boosts to Dex, Int, and a free boost. And then you have a ability flaw, which will reduce Constitution, for example. Once you've done that, when you choose your background, you will get another ability boost. Your class will give you another ability boost. And then once you have done all three of those, you are given 4 free ability boosts. And that's how you determine your starting ability scores. There are alternate rules to accommodate rolling for ability scores, which work similarly to rolling for abilities in D&D, but it's a bit more complicated than just rolling for scores. There are certain abilities that you still get to add from characters, but you lose them. It's all explained in the player's manual if you want to go with that alternative rule. But let's start here. So another thing to note is whenever you receive an ability boost, while this stat is under 18, you get to increase it by 2. Once it's over 18, you get to increase the value by 1 every time you get a boost. So if we start here, first of all, using the point buy system, to call it that, there is no way you can create a character that has more than 18 in any of your abilities. And when you do the rolling for stats, then it specifically says that no stat can be more than 18. So if you were to receive an ability boost that would push that stat to over 18, you rather get to add that ability boost to another skill, another ability. But we will start here with Dex. I normally just add in the notes where I get the boosts from. As I said, when it's below 18, you get 2 to your score for every ability boost. So we add 1 here, or we add 2 here. We get intelligence. So once again, just making a note. And that boosts that. And then you'll see it says free. Now what free means is that you can take another ability boost for any of the stats, but you cannot take an ability boost in the same stat as you've received. And that means you cannot now boost Dex with another 2, and you can't boost intelligence for another 2. You have to assign this stat to either strength, con, wisdom, or charisma. So let's say, because we're going to be a bit of a frontline elf, as a rogue we can get hit, so we want to make sure that we have a bit more HP. So we put a stat into con. So this is what our scores look like once we've applied the ability boost. However, now we get an ability flaw. Now ability flaw means we lose 2 in that specific stat. And this will always be the case. It's always -2, unlike the stats going above 18 where you can only add 1, you will always lose 2 on some type of ability flaw. Now you'll see that elves get an ability flaw to Constitution, which means we have to reduce our con by 2. Now we just put 2 into con, which means we now drop back to 10 for our constitution. Certain ancestries, for example human, do not have ability flaws, but you will also find that they do not have 3 ability boosts, rather they will only have 2 ability boosts, and that's just something to note. So what we can do now is, it says languages, common and Elven, so we can just add those here, common, Elven. That's just more just to keep track, so that we don't have to come back so often. Then there's additional languages equal to your intelligence modifier. So here's the tricky part where you'll have to jump between your ancestry and your class and your background before you get to do things like your additional languages. Because you will notice that it's based on your intelligence modifier after character creation is completed. So while our intelligence now is +1, from our free ability boosts, maybe from our background, this intelligence modifier may go up to 2 or 3, and that means we can come and add another several additional languages. So you do not need to do that right now, and you will have to come back and do that later. Traits, Elf and Humanoid, you can just add that in your character sheet. Why this is important is you will find certain spells or abilities specifically stating that it affects characters with certain traits. For example, you might find a spell that says if targeting a humanoid, this is what the spell does. And so since your character has the humanoid trait, it means that that spell will affect you. So lastly, our elf has low light vision. So it depends on where you want to add things. I just add it here, just so I know that under my senses I do have low light vision, and there's an explanation of what it does. And then finally you get to elf heritages. So this is kind of choosing your subrace in D&D 5e, or choosing a specific type of elf, whereas you might, let's leave it at that. Elf heritages: Arctic Elf, Cavern Elf, Seer Elf, Whisper Elf, Woodland Elf. They each have their own things or their own bonuses that they provide you. So we're going to choose Cavern Elf. Now you'll notice that when you choose Cavern Elf, it tells you that instead of low light vision, or on top of low light vision, we also gain dark vision. And then here you'll see that we get to choose a feat from our ancestry. So here we are provided with our first feat already. I'm just going to use the compendium to make it easier. If you don't have one, but your DM does, then he or she would be able to share their compendium with the players. Hopefully you can ask them nicely and they will do that, which is just makes it easier to create your characters. So here we have longevity, and it gives you a bunch of abilities: elven lore, elven weapon familiarity, forlorn, nimble, elf feat. So for us, Let's say we want Elven weapon familiarity. Now, we might find that actually this is not the greatest thing to choose because our class already gives us proficiency in these weapons, so we're actually just wasting a feat. That's why I said you should read through your class first, understand what it gives you, so that you can then come back and look at your ancestry feats. But for now we choose to take this feat. So we can just drag and drop it there, and it will give us certain bonuses now. So that is pretty much your ancestry done for level 1. So now we have to choose a background. We can just say here. So now you have a whole bunch of backgrounds that will describe your origins of your character. Let's just make it simple. We say that our character grew up in a circus, so he's a very good acrobat. Now you will see that you get another boost. So it says here, choose 2 ability boosts. One must be strength or dex, and the other one is a free boost. So as stated before, because we get a free boost, it means that we can't assign it in the same ability that we chose from strength or dex. So we have a dex rogue, so we're going to add another 2 here for acrobat. And let's say our elf did some exercises, so they are a bit stronger than normal elf. So we have a strength point from the acrobat. And then you will also find you get skills like you get trained in acrobatics. So here's your list of skills, and you can go to acrobatics and say you are trained, and you get a lore skill that you can add here. We are trained in circus. And you'll see we also get a skill feat. So now our background has given us steady balance. So let's find steady balance. And we can put that into skill feat. So now we've dealt with sorry, I forgot some very important things under the ancestry. So let's go back to Alf. Apart from the normal stats we received, no, never mind, I didn't forget anything. Now we go back to our classes and we start looking at the rogue. So you will see here key ability, as we mentioned before, dexterity or other. At first level your class gives you an ability boost to dexterity or an option from Rogue's Racket. So our class gives us another boost to dexterity, and we've added that. As you will remember, the owls get 6 HP, so you add your 6 HP here, and then your class gives you another hit point total. So that does not replace the 6 HP from your race or ancestry, it simply adds on top of that. So you would add 8 here. You will notice it says 8 plus your constitution modifier. So we at the moment have a 0 constitution modifier, and therefore we only add 8 to it. If you're playing Roll20, then changing your con modifier will automatically affect your maximum HP, so you do not have to worry about adjusting this number here. And that's useful because when we do our free ability assignment after our class assignment, we may put more points into con. Now you'll get to a list of initial proficiencies. Now in D&D 5 you also receive proficiencies, and it was linked to something called a proficiency bonus. And as you leveled up, that proficiency bonus would increase, and therefore the bonus you got to those proficient skills would also increase. In Pathfinder it works somewhat differently. You do not have a basic proficiency bonus, rather you have different levels of proficiency that you can in the different skills that you have. So if you look at this initially, rogues get expert in perception. So if you go to perception, you can say, it says rank, untrained, trained, expert, master and legendary. So we can say expert. And you'll see here under proficiency it says E5. So E for expert 5, because that is the bonus you currently get. You get saving throws, so a lot of skills will say you are grappled. To break free you need to make an acrobatics check, for example, and it would be compared to the fortitude save of the creature or a reflex save, depending on whether or not you're breaking the lock or you're trying to avoid something. And here you can see how it works for us here. So we are trained in fortitude, we are an expert in reflex, and we are an expert in will. So the player's guide gives a nice summary saying fortitude normally has to do with strength, reflex normally has to do with trying to avoid something. So if you spot a trap, you step on it, then you might roll a reflex saving throw to see whether or not you are nimble enough to dodge whatever the trap does. And will save would normally be for things that affect your mind. Then we get to skills. So it's pretty obvious. Once again, you are trained in stealth. So we'll get to rogue's racket, and you're trained in additional skills equal to 7 plus your intelligence modifier. So similarly to the languages that we have to get back to, we will get back to how many additional skills we have, because at the moment we have 7 plus 1, which gives us 8. So let's just assign the base value of 7, and then we can come back and select more. So we have acrobatics. Let's say we can craft some stuff, so we're familiar with how to craft things. We are familiar with how to deceive people. Since we are a rogue, we learned how to fix up wounds and stuff. People got injured in the circus for whatever reason. For the same reason, you are trained in performance. So how much is that? crafting is 1, deception is 2, medicine is 3, performance is 4, so we have another 3 to go. Society, so we are trained in society, we are trained in survival, and we are trained in thievery. So that's our 7 skills that we are trained in. Now we will get to attacks. So you are almost always trained in unarmed attacks. However, you will see that there is a separation between simple weapons and martial weapons. So here you can see we are trained in simple weapons, and we are trained in very specific weapons. So we can just say rapier, trained, sap, and then short bow and short sword. So rapier, for example, is actually a martial weapon, and that's why there's this distinction. So we are trained in simple weapons, we are not trained in martial weapons except for the rapier. So if we use any other martial weapon, we won't get any bonuses to our attack because we are untrained. But since we are trained in rapier, if we use the rapier martial weapon, we will get bonuses to our attack. And then we get to defenses. We are trained in light armor and unarmored defense. So when we get here to your armor class, you can drop it down. It says we are trained in unarmored and we are trained in light. And so that will just say whether or not we can wear these types of armor basically, and whether we get boosts from them. And last year we'll see class DC. So here's your class DC. So trained in rogue class DC, this refers to your initial key ability. So whatever your key ability is, that would be the stat you use for your class DC. Now our key ability is Dex, so we change it to Dex, and we are trained in that. So you can see at the moment our class DC is 16. So if ever we use a skill and a monster has to make a roll to beat our class DC, that is the number it should beat. So what is nice about Pathfinder 2 is it also does come with a nice table showing you exactly what you get at which level. This is very similar to D&D 5e. You can see here we needed to pick an ancestry, which we did. We needed to do a background, which we did. Initial proficiencies, these are the ones we did all around the board. Then we get a rogue's racket, which we will choose shortly. We get sneak attack, 1d6. We get surprise attack. We get a rogue feat, which we will get to, and we get a skill feat. So you've seen the proficiencies. Now we get to a rogue's racket. So this is kind of a subsection of the rogue. Were we a ruffian, so we strong-armed, we go around beating up other people, stealing from them, and a scoundrel, a thief. So let's say we're a scoundrel. So when we get to class, we are a rogue. Scoundrel rogue. And if you read this, it says that when you faint, so this is pretty much what this racket provides us. When you faint, the target is flat-footed against melee attacks. you attempt against it until the end of your next turn. On a critical success, the target is flat-footed against all melee attacks until the end of your next turn, not just yours. So you will see that feint is actually a specific action you can take during combat. So here it specifically states that if you take this action in combat where it changes the actual success and critical success effects that is provided to you by that action. So if we look at feint, it says here you use a single action and you, on a success, you will see that he's flat-footed against the next melee attack you attempt before the end of your current turn. So that means you have to immediately after succeeding attack it. Whereas it says with Scoundrel that on a success it is flat-footed for all the attacks until the end of your next turn. So it's much better to use the feint ability while you are a Scoundrel than it is to simply use the ability as it is. So just as a note, I guess we can just add something like Scoundrel, better feet or better feint, and you can just copy paste that, stick it in there so that when you use it you can make your DM aware that this is one of the abilities you get. Now it gives us some extra proficiency, so we are trained in deception, but we are already trained in it, so we lose that, and diplomacy, so we can be trained in diplomacy. Now if you read through your whole class and you've done all the prep up front, then you would know that you gain deception as a trained skill. So instead of choosing it up front when we did our 7 initial ones, we would have chosen something else like intimidation, for example, instead of choosing deception. But now our characters are set up. We get sneak attack. So sneak attack is a tricky situation, but basically it says that whenever a creature is flat-footed, you will get extra damage. And it is specifically for melee weapons that have agile or finesse as keywords, or you are using a ranged attack. So once again, if you're using a ranged attack with thrown weapons, it must also be agile or finesse weapons. So we can just add another note, or however you want to do it, just to say that we have sneak attack. Now once again you'll see if you strike a creature that has the flat-footed condition, so this is a specific thing that needs to happen to allow you to use your sneak attack. You get surprise attack, so once again in the first round of combat, all characters that haven't acted before you, so if you roll an initiative and you are the first one to go, then all the enemies below you are at the moment flat-footed. But you'll notice it's for very specific initiative rolls. So either if you roll deception or stealth for your initiative, whereas normally you will just roll perception initiative. So here's the initiative button. Normally you'll roll perception, but you can choose anything else. So if you've been sneaking around and then encountering enemies, then you will roll stealth, for example. And that means that all creatures that haven't acted are flat-footed. Once again, here's the keyword, which means that any character that you manage to strike within the first round will automatically take sneak attack damage. Rogue feats, we'll get to. Skill feats, we'll get to. You will see that every level we gain a skill feat, and that list can be found in chapter 5. And this is just the rest of the explanation of the class and how they level. Here you see the rogue feats. Now we get to pick one at first level. So nimble, dodge, Pathfinder, twin feint. So let's take twin feint as a class feat. There's twin feint, and we can just add that there. So now we have pretty much taken care. I didn't choose a skill feat. Obviously you can just go and choose another skill feat as part of your rogue class features. But once you've done that, we are pretty much done with your character creation, except for we now get 4 bonus ability score boosts that we can put anywhere. And that's the last part of the ability score boosts we get as a starting level 1 character. So I will add another 2 points. So remember, when it's underneath 18 you get 2 points for an ability boost, whereas after 18 it's only 1. Let's say I want to be a bit stronger still, and want to be a bit more healthy, and then and I'm also a bit charming, considering I come from the circus. And there you can see our stats are complete. Then the only real thing left is to buy equipment for our character. So each player character starts with 15 gold, and you can either choose to buy your own outfit for that 15 gold, or you can, in the player's manual they have sample starting kits that show you what you start with and how much gold is left, and this is kind of the recommended kit for your specific class. So you can go through there. It's normally a fairly good recommendation. For our benefit, we are actually just going to kit ourselves out. So let's start with, we want to get armor, so let's start with leather armor. So something to note, and this isn't uncommon, but you will see that your it gives you an AC bonus, which says how much this armor protects you with, and a dex cap of +4, which means that we add our bonus to our armor class, but if our bonus becomes 5 or 6 or 7, it will only ever add 4 to it. It'll never go above 4. And then you have check penalties, speed penalties, strength. So this is another important thing to note. Strength 10 means that you need at least 10 strength to wear this armor. So if I played a gnome, for example, that gets an ability flaw in strength, and I did not put points into strength, I would be at -1 here. I would be at 8 strength because I had to subtract 2, and that would mean that I can't actually wear leather armor. So it's important to check what your requirements are for your armor. It might just turn out that I would have had to take my 2 points out of charisma and put them into strength so that I could actually wear leather armor. Anyway, we are wearing leather armor, and let's say we want a rapier, and we are going to dual wield a short sword. Now, once you've added them into this, the character sheet will automatically give you attacks for those 2 weapons. And you will see here that each weapon has trades. As you've seen here, this rapier has finesse, which means if we meet the requirements, we can actually do backstab damage with the rapier. And if you look at short sword, it has versatile and finesse. I apologize. It has agile and finesse. Versatile means you can choose to either do slashing damage or piercing damage. Now we just make sure this is trained because it would be a martial weapon. Make sure this is trained. Great. Okay, so now we have our weapons and we are ready to venture forth. And that is pretty much our cave elf scoundrel rogue that we have created. We have 18 armor class, which is the 1 from, because we trained, we get T3. Because we have 4 decks, we get 4 here, and because that item added 1, we get 8 bonus in total, and that means that we have 18 AC. In the next video I'll explain more about how the system works between trained, so you can see here proficiency, untrained, trained, expert, master, legendary. And I'll explain how that works. I'll also explain some of the stuff you need to know about weapons, because there are rules around damage, for example, that's a bit different from D&D 5e, where you would expect finesse weapons to have some other effects, and I'll explain what happens with multiple attacks, things like that. But yeah, I hope this video was useful. As you can see, I'm not quite an expert in creating the characters, but I hope this has given you an idea of how I at least approach character creation, and that it would help you when you create your first or second character in your games, and have fun playing this game. Cheers.